Oh, Bobbin!
Blistering starts to a tennis match.
Shakespeare got it wrong. It wasn't King Lear. It's King Lear.
LeBron James with no regard for human.
Yuvraj Singh finishes things off on style.
This is a News Laundry podcast, and you're listening to NL Playoffs.
Hello and welcome to NL Playoffs Round 3. My name is Gautam. I have with me my co-host Aniket. Aniket, say namaste.
Hello world.
We have a very special guest joining us on our podcast. We are thrilled. We are still a very budding and upcoming podcast, so we are really thrilled to have Xenia Dicuna with us. She is a sports journalist at The Field, which is a part of the Scroll.in. We were just discussing just before we started that what a dream job it is to be a sports journalist and cover sports and watch sports for a living. So welcome, Xenia. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you so much, Gautam. Thanks, Aniket, for having me. Yes, when watching sports for a living sounds like the dream job, it was my childhood dream. So here I am.
You know what? I actually dreamt of becoming a sports production guy or a sports journalist, but life choices keep changing from time to time. So, Aniket, what was sports a part of your dream job when you were young?
I wish I knew it was an option actually, looking back in time. But I was so ignorant that I just saw sports. But I just wanted to say it's such an honor having Xenia over, and thank you for doing this.
Not at all. It's my pleasure.
So we have a fairly very, very busy sports week, but what we'd like to do, like we did the last time around also, is that we'd like to cover delve deep into a couple of topics that have made the headlines in the world of sports. The thing that we are most excited about is to talk mainly about India at the Olympics, that we're going to cover a lot. And obviously the really big news coming out of Barcelona, Lionel Messi and Paris is that Messi eventually now has ended up in Paris, is actually training with them. I saw Messi in PSG colors the other day. Kind of looked weird. It'll take some time to get used to that picture, but we'll talk a little bit more about that at the lag end of this podcast. But Aniket, I know you have listed out a whole bunch of headlines, so take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Gautam. So the football season's coming back. La Liga has started playing. The Premier League will start soon. So there have been some changes to the VAR rules, where people are now working on the controversial VAR system that was there last year, and they have decided to add benefit of the doubt to strikers. I think we'll only know more in time about how these rules change, but seems like they're still working on it. And then there's also the...
Let me ask Xenia about the VAR. Are you a fan of VAR in football, Xenia, or not? I hate it.
It really depends on the situation. It seems like, we've had football without VAR for so long, so that seems to be the way ahead. But also there are some real howlers which make a big difference. I think if it can be regulated somehow, which I think can be said for all things in sport, it would be helpful only if it's regulated and not used in its current form.
Yeah, I like the goal line technology because I know that is perfect, but I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I think you've got to work on it. But like Xenia said, the howlers, they're kept at bay. But I think they're also creating howlers because of the technology. So that's the sad part. But hopefully they converge and we get a more regulated system. So with that being said, so like you already mentioned, Gautam, Messi is now in the PSG stripes, which is hard to see for me as a Barcelona fan. But well, that's the cards we are dealt with today. So, and PSG has made some crazy free transfers. So they've got Lionel Messi, they've got Sergio Ramos, they've got Donnarumma, who's the recent winner of the Euro. There's Gini Wijnaldum. And so they seem to be, Pochettino, the coach, and the PSG management seem to be on a crazy signing spree, and they're doing a brilliant job. They're doing their job well, I guess. Someone's doing a good job there. So that's that. Then also your team, Gautam, is Man United has signed Jadon Sancho and Rafael Varane. So I'm sure you'll have something to say about those signings as well. And
I'm secretly excited about that, but I'm not going to flaunt it in front of everybody. Xenia, do you have a favorite football club that you follow, or are you just an ambivalent football watcher?
No, I am a huge Barcelona fan. I don't know how long that's going to be in present tense. But I mean, I started watching Barcelona for Ronaldinho, and when he was number 10. And then you thought that there was going to be no new number 10 when you had Messi. And then you thought, oh, Neymar is number 10. Except now the jersey has changed. Neymar is number 10. He is playing with Messi, but it's not in Spain. It's also, I think, having
Messi's number 30 also now.
is number 30 and with Neymar is number 10, which was the Brazilians' dream at one point. I'll be the center.
Yeah.
What's really weird is La Liga's, the captain of Barcelona and Real Madrid are playing in France this season. It keeps getting weird. Imagine like Ramos and Messi in the same team. I don't know whether Ramos would be able to resist tackling Messi, just every time he's near the goal. But jokes apart, I don't know whether, this is going to change a lot of dynamics both for League One and La Liga. If they win the Champions League, well, great. But we've seen that a star team need not actually win Champions League. So this is going to be a big season in European football, if not in the league football.
Absolutely. Especially like the exodus from La Liga. They've lost like Ronaldo, Neymar, Lionel Messi. It's tough to see. But anyways, we'll see what happens. Exciting times ahead. So as you said, the most Arsenal team does not win. That takes us to Chelsea, who won the Champions League last year as a unit. So Romelu Lukaku is actually back home at Chelsea from Inter Milan. So with that being said, that's basically what we had for headlines. We can delve into the Olympics. So I'll briefly state out what happened at the Olympics, some of the things that happened. So there was Eliud Kipchoge, who is 36 of Kenya, and he won his second consecutive Olympic marathon. And he's the same guy who actually, along with Nike, ran the sub 2-hour marathon. So he's come in the Olympics and set it by storm again.
He's widely considered the greatest right now, isn't he, Aniket? The Kipchoge?
I wouldn't use the word greatest, but for sure he set a record that people have been eyeing for. So he's like the Roger Bannister to break the sub 4-minute mile record. But again, that was tailored for it. It was not an official marathon, so it does not qualify as a record. But anyways, I mean, he showed that it's humanly possible. So with that being said, there's also I found very interesting, and I'm sure you both got it too because it's all over, but the men's gold for the high jump was actually shared between Qatar and Italy. So did you guys get to see that?
If you can, we can continue with the jump off.
Can we have 2 gold?
It's possible. It depends if you decide. If you decide on
Olympic champions.
Yes, that was one of the, the moments of Olympics where you feel like, this is, there's something beyond sport. There are so many times during an Olympic Games where you see these human moments really surpass sport. And the second he goes like, can we have 2 goals? It was really special even then. And then you come to know the backstory that these two are friends and they had career-threatening injuries and they supported each other through it. And that just makes it all the more special, It's been a journey together for them.
Yeah. And also the sheer joy once they were like, yeah, we're going to win this goal, just how they reacted immediately after, it's kind of unbelievable. They couldn't contain themselves. Even the Italian guy in specific, what's his name? Gianmarco Tamberi. He couldn't control himself because I know, as you said, Xenia, he came back from an injury. He's seen a lot. But yeah, even the Qatari guy, Mutaz Asab Barshim, he had the whole big sunglasses thing going, which I kind of found very interesting. I don't know if it's a superstition or something, but it was really cool.
Definitely. It was one of the nicer moments of the Olympics. Even I think in pole vault also, when Mondo Duplantis was going for the record vault after, basically claiming gold because he's just the most dominant pole vaulter right now. You could see his opponents really cheer him on to get the world record. That was nice.
Yeah.
There are so many small moments like this where you realize, these guys are competitors, but also all of them just love sport. There's a new world record. There's a new great jump. They love it.
Absolutely. And
it's
totally
also, I think you're right. Also, they participate in all of these same competitions, right? They're going around in the circuit. They know each other very well. It's kind of a small sporting unit if you think about it. They're all individual players. They come from different countries, but they probably see each other quite a lot in all of these world competitions. So they do have that bonhomie for sure.
Closer home, we had Sindhu do that after the medal ceremony.
Yeah.
Where Taizu Ying, who defeated her in the semi-final, ended up with silver, and Sindhu was comforting her. And it's beautiful because Sindhu is last Olympic silver medalist. So if there is one person who knows what Tai Tzu Ying felt like, it is Sindhu. That was another lovely moment. She shared it on Instagram. Of course, we couldn't really see it on TV. But sport, am I right?
Yeah, and I think that's also what happens when there's no money or any contention. If you look at the IPL, for example, or if you look at the Premier League and stuff, I don't know if it's a direct comparison or not, but when you're playing for your country and there's not money and sponsorship and all of this at stake, I think it's generally a good and very cool environment to play in. But I might be generalizing a little too much, but that's what I think. Anyway, Aniket, sorry, go ahead. I interrupted you again.
No, you're good. So there's also the Norwegian beach handball team that actually ran into some controversy. So apparently there are rules that are being changed because of the outrage. So the IHF has got a lot of pressure, and now from countries especially like Germany, Sweden, Denmark, and France. So let's see, the more power to the women of that team who actually stood up. And just to give context, this is basically over the Norwegian beach handball team actually wearing shorts instead of what was officially the uniform was actually a bikini bottom. So that got into a little bit of a controversy, and rightly so, because my personal opinion was it was extremely sad how the authorities actually reacted to that by fining the team.
And I think that there's definitely scope for correction when it comes to kits and uniforms, because it happened in gymnastics as well, where the German team was wearing a full body suit instead of the leotard, and they weren't reprimanded, of course, but it said that there are these changes coming in, and it really depends on now the organizers how do they deal with it. It's the choice of the player, and that has to be respected. You can't fine them for it.
Yeah, and I don't know how the organizations get these so wrong sometimes, even in this today's time of heightened awareness, where it's a different time. It's not the 80s or the 70s anymore, but still there are these administrations and organizations and sports authorities that are still stuck in such a primitive age, but that they don't even get it almost. It's just to think about it doesn't make sense that they were going to fine them for not wearing bikinis instead of shorts. It's kind of mind-boggling.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, I think it's time. The world has moved on, and they should start taking the right call on at least on silly, stupid stuff like this. But then, with that being said, let's move to tennis. So the Grand Slam's coming up. The The US Open's coming up, and I just read the news today that a lot of these 5 major stars, which is Novak Djokovic, Rafael Nadal, Roger Federer, Serena Williams, and Venus Williams, actually will not be attending any of the warm-up events. So I know, Xenia, you follow tennis a lot. So do you have any thoughts on that? Because I wanted to take this from here to Djokovic at the Olympics and stuff like that. So please feel free to share thoughts on this.
It is a sign of things to come, of the passage of time and age. We spent the best part of 2000 and 2010 watching these players, and now suddenly they are all on the wrong side of 30. Most of them, Djokovic is 34. It makes sense to pick and choose tournaments, and somebody like a Serena, for example, has lately been playing much less of warm-up tournaments. She still does really good at the Grand Slams when she's 100% fit.
Yeah.
So with Serena, I think it's just a call to preserve energy. Venus, again, I would think it's just trying to play as to be able to do well at US Open. She can't be playing a couple of weeks before. Rafa and Federer are definitely injured, because these guys don't usually pull out unless their bodies are on the line. And I think that is going to be the biggest tennis story of 2021 after Djokovic. Is going to be how this was probably the end of the Big Three era. And it's so fitting that Djokovic reaches 19 and 20, beating Rafa at Roland Garros, and he didn't really come across Federer, but the fact that he's won these two back-to-back and reaching 20 at a time when the other two are fading is very cinematic in its in the storyline of men's tennis. And Djokovic, I believe, will be there at US Open. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, all 4 Grand Slams. He's primed for it. And of course, he would take some time after Olympics, and how well he regroups. The guy saved 2 championship points to win a Grand Slam. Nobody regroups better than him.
You're so right about Djokovic. I was actually, Xenia, convinced that he was going to win the gold medal. I thought there was no chance in hell that he was not going to win the gold medal. I thought he was all on par to winning the career slam or the golden slam, right? So they call it the golden slam. Yeah, so I thought he was definitely going to do this, but it was such a shock when I think Zverev beat him, right?
That's right.
Was it Zverev?
Yes.
Yeah, so I thought there was no way he was going to lose, especially given, he went a set down. I was like, okay, he comes back. It's not over until it's over. As you said, he regroups and comes back. We've seen this through the years. But I don't actually now that you say it, and now the more that I think about it, I think at the end of the day, eventually when all said and done, Djokovic is probably going to end up with more Grand Slams than Federer and Nadal. To be honest with you, they're all equal now, but I think Djokovic has the most chance to win another 1 or 2 Grand Slams.
Definitely. It's just basic science in a way. He's the youngest of them. He's still world number 1. He's going to have the best of the draws. He's going to have that reputation factor around him because he is who he is. And Grand Slams are best of 5, which gives him an advantage that really the younger people somehow are not able to crack that code to be able to, to play sustained tennis over 3 sets or 4 sets. And that was the difference at the Olympics because, Zverev knows how to win in best of 3. He's won 4 Masters now. He's always been one of the big upcoming guys. He's seen as the future world number 1. Purely, of course, tennis speaking, personally, Zverev has different issues. But that he's one of the guys who can beat Djokovic. My biggest surprise was Djokovic not winning the bronze against Carreño Busta. That sort of, it was sort of into a meltdown territory, which just tells you the kind of strain he's under to, constantly try and be the best.
Yeah. And I think in a way it worked out for him, Xenia, because I think in a way he in his mind, he must have felt like, what's the point of winning a bronze? He already has, it is not like Federer when, I think Federer had a bronze or something before. So, Djokovic already has a gold in Rio, right? So
No.
I think he was
Djokovic doesn't have an Olympic
He does
gold.
not?
He just has an Olympic bronze.
Oh, really? I thought he had.
No. He doesn't have a gold or a bronze, a silver. He has a bronze at Beijing 2008. Federer has a silver, Nadal has a gold, and Federer has a doubles gold, and Nadal also has a doubles gold. So the Olympic trophy cabinet is all Nadal. He's got the 2 big gold medals.
Wow.
Okay.
That was good to know. I didn't know that.
I was under the impression that he won the gold in Rio last time.
Yeah, that was Andy Murray. He lost in the first round to Del Potro.
Okay.
It was a very emotional match because he was obviously coming in after having lost Wimbledon, and the first round against Del Potro in Brazil never going to be easy.
Yeah.
That was pretty shocking then.
The legend killer, giant killer Del Potro.
If only Del Potro was fit, tennis would be different.
Oh,
Yeah.
I know. I also think the same about Marat Safin, where he was like in the late 2000s. But anyway,
Yeah.
Did you watch the Djokovic game as it was happening live? What do you make of it?
So I must confess, I didn't. There were a lot of India events happening. And when he won the first set 6-1, I mean, going by track record, Sasha Zverev and Djokovic, how the second one will end up. And it's best of 3. So, he's won just 1 game so far. But from what I saw in the highlights, it's just simple as Zverev started making all his shots, and Djokovic does not make unforced errors, but somehow he just kept leaking errors, and you don't want to give Zverev that confidence because once he's confident, his serve clicks. And when Zverev has no double faults and aces, you're in trouble. So that's pretty much what happened from what I gauged from the highlights and the stats.
Yeah. And what did you make of Osaka? Because I thought I watched I unfortunately also couldn't watch it live, but I would definitely watch the highlights. She definitely looked out of sorts. Her body language was off in the second round when she lost. What do you make of her? Because she was coming in without much of game practice.
It's very different, I think, for her playing here than a Grand Slam. I think the Tokyo heat would have made a difference. Of course, everybody had the same conditions, but not having played in so long and then, suddenly being, on the ground there, and also the heat, the pressure probably got to her. But Osaka has phases, she's sometimes super erratic. Sometimes she's the most consistent player there is. It's a drawback of the style of tennis she plays. She plays a very hard hard-hitting, powerful game. So when she strikes, it looks beautiful. But sometimes when she does not getting into her zone, it can lead to a loss very quick. There is very little room for this gritting out wins with someone like Osaka, like those you're like Halep or Kerber style wins where they will grind it out and get a push for the third set, get a result. For her, her game is a lot about striking big, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And of course, she must have been under a different kind of pressure this time.
Yeah.
And she's still very young. We forget that she's going to have more Olympics and a lot more Grand Slams.
That's for sure. Yeah.
So with this, we could also transition to a topic I'm super excited about: India at the Olympics. Right. So as all of India knows, we have Neeraj Chopra, who's set India ablaze, like literally, by getting a gold in the track and field events.
87.58 क्रॉस करना होगा. He will not do it. गोल्ड मेडल आ गया है भारत को ट्रैक एंड फील्ड में पहली बार. नीरज चोपड़ा का नाम याद कर लीजिए, इतिहास बन चुका है टोक्यो 2020 में.
I would say technically the first gold for India in track and field events. Am I correct, Gautam and Xenia?
No, I think Norman Pritchard,
yes.
right? In 1900.
Yeah. So there is a lot of doubt over Norman Pritchard's nationality. He because of the whole colonial rule, then we do not really know whether he was Indian origin or he was. He definitely represented India because that's what the International Olympic Committee's records say. But there is a lot of research that says otherwise, that he was actually a British national who lived in India, because back then India was like this extension of England. So there is a lot of gray area over there. Of course, 1900 was a very different time. There is no way we can cross-check what happened. But I would say this is the first athletics medal or independent India. That's the correct way to put it.
Yeah, and I think I should say Aniket was one of the first to call out Neeraj Chopra's name before the Olympics even started as a hopeful. I had no clue. I know he was doing his Olympics research back then. So Aniket, all shout outs to you, man.
Yeah, unfortunately, I got his last name wrong, so I'm also guilty of that. But yeah, so I apologize again. But I think I said Sharma or something instead. I sincerely apologize for that. But yeah, Neeraj Chopra. Yeah, I had followed him. I found out about him via social media and some of his previous, throws that I had seen. Because he was a youngster and he set a world record, I believe, right? In the under 18 category or something, he set
under
a world
20.
record. Under 20.
Under
okay.
20, yeah.
Yeah, and that's where I actually first heard of him, and I was like, okay, so this guy seems super exciting. And boy, when I saw his second throw, I just want to spend some time talking about that. So did you guys see his throw in which he actually won the...
Yes, I was on the javelin throw that evening.
Yeah, I just thought that was like, it was so cool. Like, he didn't turn around, he just puts his hand up, and I think it's just being in complete sync and knowing that you've done your best. I think because at that point you're not competing, I think, because when you put your hand up for a throw, I think you've done as good as you can do probably.
Yes, and also I think by the time the first throw really set things in order, when he had an 87 when nobody else could really get that, and he was throwing second. So he himself said that the others were under pressure because you already have a benchmark to sort of try and cross. Again, the heat in Tokyo played a role. Vetter was not doing really good. And all of these, by then you know that he was in the medal list. And 87 in your first throw is going to put you on the podium, and everyone else is on the lower side of 80s and clearly not at their best.
Yeah.
By the second, it must have felt so good that before he could even check the mark, he was sure that he's hit a good throw.
Yeah, I think the one thing that kind of stands out to me, and I don't know if you felt this also, Xenia, is that his whole style, just the throwing style and how he runs up, how he starts and stuff. You typically see all these javelin throwers or, pole vaulters and all of that get a head start. You also see, they take some little time, breathe and, clap and stuff like that. I did not find the same in Neeraj Chopra. He's like, he just ties his belt or whatever he does with his thing and then he just goes. I feel like, didn't you think that he has like a distinct style of how he runs up and throws the javelin?
Yes, he's just very focused in the moment. Even after that, he was just putting his jacket, just sitting very calmly. He had, not a big show of emotion, nothing. and that plays a big role sometimes.
Yeah.
I think he was also extremely confident after the qualification round, which is an edge that can't be replicated. He would have seen, look, he's the expert. He would have seen how others are throwing and the conditions. He probably made some mental calculations, and he knew that he's in line for a podium. In fact, after that, funnily, there was a press conference after his Olympic medal, and he said one of the things he was trying to do in his later throws, and he realized he had the lead, is to go for a personal best and Olympic record. So he tried going for the 90, and that is why the second two throws were not so, the third and fourth throws were not so great, and he cancelled them because he was sure that he's sure of his position. So he imagined in an Olympic final being so confident that you're going for your personal best and not just, now you've already set the goalposts higher.
Yeah, that is actually crazy that he actually, decided to do that. The sheer confidence. I mean, he clearly comes across as a very, very confident guy. I know. I think one of his friends wrote an article for ESPN India. I read yesterday, I believe, where he was talking about how just growing up, how much of a star he was. But also then he was also, when he spoke with the guy who wrote the article, so he was saying when he spoke with Neeraj Chopra, he was always talking about how he could have thrown better and how some technicality was kind of impeding him to throw even farther. So he was just saying how as you said, Xenia, how single-minded and focused he was on the craft.
Definitely, you can feel that he's somebody who's so attuned to his craft. You can understand his technicalities. When he talks, that this is somebody who's absolutely in love with what he does, and he's constantly trying to do better. In fact, I've shared this anecdote before, but I'd love to repeat it. That in 2016 he missed qualification for Rio by a few days. His throw at the Under-20 World Championships, the world record came like 10-12 days after the qualification deadline, which means he couldn't go to Rio. And at an event after the Olympics, he was invited, and I had a chance to interview him. And one of the things he said, he was 18 then, and people just say these things, and he was like, if I can work hard, I can definitely get a medal in Tokyo. If I keep training like this and I keep, I get the support like this, and I'm fit, I can definitely get it what I missed this time. So since 5 years, this has been an extremely confident athlete who knew his, talent, and he worked really hard, and it's been rough on him. He missed 2019 due to a shoulder, due to an elbow injury.
Yeah.
Which means he missed the World Championship in Doha. He's not really competed in the same heat because Doha would probably have similar weather conditions. And then the Olympics got postponed and there was no competition. And he qualified just earlier in the year. So he cut it very close in a sense.
Yeah.
And during lockdown, he was stuck in Patiala. He was not able to, go abroad and train as early as he would have liked. Of course, when he was in Tokyo, none of these things really mattered. But it gives you context as to what all he had to sort of get through physically and mentally to be able to throw with such confidence that, he's now able to set an even bigger record.
Yeah, now that, especially after you tell me all this, it just makes me believe that this man has like a very clear head. And
yeah,
wow, I wish more athletes like this, take up sport in India, because I'm pretty sure there are many out there. It's not only him, but I hope everyone gets a chance and, does what he did.
He's definitely going to be the spark that starts it. We saw what Abhinav Bindra's gold, or even Rathore silver before that they did. Shooting is such a big sport in India now. Of course, they didn't really do well at the Olympics, but this is a sport with infrastructure and foundation. And if that happens at athletics, that could be massive for India.
Yeah, how I was thinking about, when we were growing up, we heard stories about P.T. Usha and Ashwini Nachappa. Just talk about track and field, right? And I know growing up in the 2000s, we always used to hear about Anju Bobby George in the long jump. But then, unfortunately, whatever reasons, it could be lack of support, infrastructure, whatever it could be, they were never able to, grab a medal. But now that Neeraj Chopra did it, maybe that's going to act as a spark for sure. And also the way he did it as if he belonged. It was not like a underdog story or something. He just went in there, just 3 throws, 1 in the qualification round, 2 in the finals, and that was it.
Actually, yes, that the confidence and complete control he had, we don't really see that from a lot of Indians. There's always a bit of hesitancy. There is always a slow start and then you build towards it. And here he was like he's already the world champion. He was so confident. 3 throws does it. Yes, nicely put.
So you spoke about sparking something. I also wanted to talk to you because I read your article, Zinnia, on Aditi Ashok, your interview actually. So I found that super interesting and I wanted to talk about that with you, especially given golf. I think this is an opinion, there's no data backing this, but compared to other sports, golf is slightly relatively less watched and less indulged in sport. It seems like an elite
I think you
sport
mean
at least.
boring.
I've played golf a little bit here and there. I would say it's extremely awesome to play. It's a brilliant sport to play. Watching, I'm not sure. But yeah, I was very curious to get your thoughts on how your interview was with, and you can also let our viewers, listeners know where to find it, because I thought it was a really nice interview.
Thank you, Aniket. That's really nice of you. It's on scroll.in. Yeah. We can share a link in the episode description. I think
Yes.
that would be nice.
For sure.
I think golf definitely is not much watched or followed in India, and also a couple of reasons. A, it's a pro sport, like tennis, but it's not as, it's a professional sport. They're not representing India there. So that element is already taken away. She may be an Indian, but she's not playing for the national federation or something. Secondly, it is an expensive sport and it is an inaccessible sport in the sense that you need certain equipment and certain areas to play it. You can play football wherever you want, but you need a golf course to play golf. And gully mein cricket is fine, but it's that sort of thing is always going to have a golf courses are large land areas and it's not going to be accessible to a lot of people. But the very fact that people woke up early to watch her, that people try to understand golf, and you should see the Google trend numbers, they're crazy. The upward spike in the number of searches for golf, it just tells you the impact she had. And at Scroll, we did a small explainer as to how golf for the Olympics works. Because I'm sure a lot of us don't really know what, you would know a birdie from a bogey, but stuff, the under par, and there are so many terms we don't know. And we did that, and the kind of response we got was really great. Everybody was like, thank you for breaking this down for us, because we wanted to understand the sport, because we want to support Aditi. And, India is a sports crazy nation, but India is usually connected to success. And, it may be a 4th place finish, but the response and the interest that she, got for golf is a metric of success for sure.
How did she come across to you when you were interviewing her, Zinnia?
Extremely eloquent, It's a mark of a lot of these sports persons I've spoken to, even at a very young age. They are very mature. And she's playing her second Olympics, She played her first as an 18-year-old in Rio.
Yeah.
So she's seen a lot. She's seasoned. She was very eloquent. She had her thoughts very straight on a lot of things. Like when I asked her, how do you make golf accessible to Indians? And one of the things she said is, first in schools, if you just give them a mat, a couple of balls and the clubs, and you get the feel of hitting it and you make them aware that these are the rules, automatically children understand the sport instead of, as adults trying to Google like, what is under par score or whatever, if children know the rules. And then secondly, she said that if golf courses made allowances for juniors to train instead of being members only. These are small things, but it could make a big difference if you had access without trying to pay membership fees of golf clubs. That could change. So I thought that she was really, clear with her views, and she's really thought out her role in this. She's very sorted. She knows where she is. In fact, when I asked her what are your goals, and she was very clear that she wants to improve her ranking. When I asked her a not so nice question about why her driving was not looking as good, a lot of commentators were talking about that. She explained that how she lost a lot of strength because she recovered from COVID as recently as May.
Yeah.
So it was a very nice experience to talk to somebody who's so confident and so clear with her responses.
I'm sure she has professional ambitions in the future, so that would be cool to see her on they call it the WPGA tour, hopefully. So we'll see how that goes.
She's been on there for the last 5 years. She's played on the LET tour and the LPGA tour.
Oh, the LPGA tour, sorry. But it's not the
Right,
WPGA.
right, yeah.
It shows
So
you how
she's-
ignorant I am with golf.
Well, that's the thing, right? We'll all learn now because of her.
Yeah.
We wouldn't have otherwise.
So, with that being said, I've also wanted to touch upon all your thoughts, actually, both of you, on India's shooting woes. So, because at least before the Olympics started, and especially after Abhinav Bindra got us the gold, every Olympics that comes upon, I have my hopes on shooting and even archery, actually, for that matter. So just from Sinja, just by being in this field and actually closely observing what's happening, do you have thoughts on why this happens? Like, generally, I do understand it's like a crazy place to be in. Like, Olympics is not, like an everyday thing. There's a lot of pressure on these folks who are actually going there. They're representing their country, and especially in this year where you have the pandemic, and a lot of these athletes have been COVID positive once upon a time. Training regimes have really been affected. Is there something deeper here, or is it like, eventually India is going to be one of those really good countries that produces great shooters?
So it's a bit of both. I would say, first, unlike both in Rio and Tokyo, shooting was a major miss. You cannot deny that. You had a lot of expectations from both teams based on their track record, of course. These expectations were not, unfounded. They definitely had done. They had those scores. They had the qualification. You can blame a lot of mental conditioning and nerves because that sort of thing happens at the Olympics. But what it says is that we need to have a really deep look at what we are doing. NRAI, the Shooting Federation, has done a lot of foundation work for the shooters. So there are systems in place, but there's somewhere still a gap. Things are still slipping through. Mental conditioning, or peaking at the right time, because shooting is such a mentally intensive, a very individualized sport where you're really competing against yourself at the end of the day. You're not against somebody else. And there has to be some sort of a systemic change where we look at how to prepare them for how to prepare our shooters. And a lot of them are so young, especially this time, that they're probably going to be there in Paris in 3 years' time. So what has to be identified is why it was a collective failure. That if you can figure out, was it the numbers, was it the, something with the issue, with the training, with selection, what happened there, and then you can sort of build on that. And one thing I would probably say that is with Saurabh Chaudhary, you could see that his qualification numbers were great throughout in the 2 events he took part in. So maybe in finals, and he usually is always very good at finals, but this time he just had a poor start. And in shooting, it's very difficult to recover after one bad series. So if that's a very small area. But that was the only one we could see. None of the shooting qualifications were telecast in India or anywhere. So we really can't gauge what went wrong in qualification. It's all going to be guesses and assessment, because none of us could have really seen what happened except the people who were there.
Yeah, for sure. And one thing that really intrigues me is something you mentioned, and something even Abhinav Bindra spoke about, is this mental conditioning. Because I remember reading, I think sometime back, about how he spoke about he really spent a lot of time on the mental aspect of his game, and how he changed his breathing, and he had a coach basically just for, a performance coach and stuff like that. And I think his coach was, he hired a coach himself, and he spent a lot of time training. So what you said seems like, very correct, where this is a extremely mentally taxing sport.
Correct. And in fact, it really boils down to peaking at the right time. So with Abhinav Bindra, once he qualified for the Olympics, he wasn't really scoring very high in other events. He was just focusing on building this consistent base where he was looking more at consistency, and not like he wasn't doing really well in a lot of the World Cups, etc. Before that, he was not even participating in a lot of events. So maybe there is a game plan there, that once you get your qualification set, then you just work on getting yourself ready for the Olympics and just focus on one thing. Of course, that really worked for Bindra. Maybe for some athlete, it works to be in competition all the time. It's very thin line, and so difficult for us to say from the outside.
Yeah, I was watching Hina Sidhu, the former Olympian shooter. I was watching her interview. She was talking about it. I know you spoke briefly about the selection process. She was of the opinion that the contingent that was sent out for shooting was probably the best that they could send out. I don't think, in her opinion, I think she said there was no other better shooters that India could have sent out. But you're right, because I think because shooting is such a small margin sport, it's just a matter of inches or millimeters sometimes, where that's all the difference that it takes to qualify for the next round or finish third over eighth or something. So There are a lot of factors that come into play, and you have to just play almost an errorless game like Abhinav Bindra did in 2008 to pull something off. But yeah, definitely a letdown, Aniket.
Yeah, for sure. And even archery, actually, I was heartbroken because I was a fan of Deepika, especially she was rank 1. She was rank 1, right? When she went into...
Yeah, she is the world number 1. But in archery, your seedings are dependent on how you perform in the ranking round.
I see.
And India really paid the price there because everybody was like 9th. Deepika was 9th. I think the mixed team was 9th. And when you are 9th, and which means you're not in the top 8, which means your quarterfinal is already loaded against you. Your draw, your top 8 is usually a good place to be. So a difference in ranking would have been that she met Ansan. She would have met the eventual champion a little later. Maybe if you meet somebody in the semi-finals, it gives you a better chance.
Yeah.
And that it really went down on the first day. Again, we couldn't see the qualification live, but again, a small margin sport where well begun is so important, and if that's gone, it's gone.
Yeah, it's small things make such a huge difference in these sports. It's kind of amazing.
Yeah, that's very true. And I was like seriously contemplating and this is something I think Abhinav Bindra spoke about this. I'm not sure, but he did mention like how, an athlete will not come and just peak at the Olympics. That's like a black swan event, where somebody comes. It's about being consistent and how you play over years and years. And so it does seem like, hopefully what I understand from here is next in Paris, it's going to be a much stronger shooting, much stronger archery team. So the marksmanship hopefully will be much better and improved.
Yeah, that is the hope.
Yeah. So with that being said, do you guys want to talk about anything else in particular that you had your favorite moments from this year's Olympics?
I would actually like to ask Xenia about, I think this kind of took the country by storm a little bit. I would like to talk about hockey. Xenia, I don't know if you watched any of the big Indian women's and the men's game live or not, but how was it like a cricket viewing event in India? That's the feeling I got just watching the social media coverage of both the men's and the women's hockey events.
I wouldn't know whether to compare it to cricket because, it really becomes apples and oranges. But hockey has always been a sentimental sport for Indians. You've grown up being told that, India were number 1 in hockey. We have 8 gold medals. We were the best. And you can't reconcile that to what the current team is right now. It's just, if you've always seen Indian hockey not do well in our lifetimes. So this was a big, big deal to actually see India win a hockey medal. But somehow for me, what was even more special was the women's team beating Australia in the semi-final, because this is a team that barely made it to the quarters in the first place. They lost their first 3 games and by big margins. They had to win the next 2. But, being last in the group stage meant you're playing Australia, former champions, just a fitter team overall. And, with the reputation of being an unbeatable team, and to beat them by 1 goal margin after scoring early and holding on to that lead with literal bodies on the line, that was special to watch. With the men's team, there has always been a consistent team building. You've seen them get good victories in the past. They were a genuine medal hope, at least this time around, because that they had a unit. The women's team came as a complete surprise. This is the first time they've qualified for 2 straight Olympics. 2016 was the first time they qualified for the Olympics on their own. So it's been a bigger surprise. And I think that 4th place finish means so much more than what we realize now. Because so it's a bit like the Women's Cricket World Cup in 2017. You lost the final, but what it did is it sparked genuine interest in the sport and it got in a lot more investment. And if women's hockey also gets a similar kind of interest and investment, to be the start of things, because I know that they have a lot of support from Hockey India too. They are given, they go on a lot of tours, and this will mean they will play more, even more than what they do now. And the more they play, if this is what they do with how much the resources and play time they have had after a pandemic, imagine what happens to this team, which is still a very young team, when they get more time, more match time, more resources, more interest. It will be amazing.
That is for sure. One thing is that there is a never say die attitude with this women's team for sure. Sharda Ugra wrote a wonderful article. I thought it was a little sentimental, but I thought she could definitely afford to be sentimental at that point. But she said she talked about how there is this culture of just not giving up. Even we saw that in the bronze medal match when they went down to Great Britain fighting. I think it ended up 5-4 or something. They were 2 goals down and they hung in, came back, actually scored 3 straight. Actually, they went up 3-2 and then eventually ended up losing 5-4. But yeah, that is a very good point that you said. Imagine if they actually have all the resources available to them, and if it was not, times of COVID, how much better that would be. This definitely augurs well for Paris.
For sure. In fact, even Asian Games next year, I would think, that could be a great, this is a great springboard to do really well then. And Commonwealth Games. In fact, as the Sharda Ugra article says, a lot of them come from backgrounds where a woman playing sport is not generally welcome or appreciated. And the kind of challenges they've had to overcome are so different from other athletes, And there was a time when Savita Punya, goalkeeper, had to rely on her parents for funding and for, daily expense money. Not too long ago, I would say about 2017 that happened. And which means it wasn't even that much of a professional sport for you to sort of pay the bills.
Wow.
So these are the small changes which, if they happen, back home, if parents then allow their girls to play without worrying, these are the changes that happen. It's not always about the medals; it is about the mentality change that can happen with a 4th place finish. And that never say die attitude, I think, comes from their background because they know that this is it. This is their stage.
For sure. And after you said that, it feels like, apart from their battle, they're fighting a battle for the country in another sense, where at this point it's beyond only those 11 people on the, in the park actually trying to score a goal, but the social obligations that they have to go through, and the fight is more than just on the field actually, which is unfortunate.
True. I mean, that's true for so many women's sport in India. You're always fighting for something bigger than just that medal.
Yeah, more power to all of them.
I think the one thing that I kind of wanted to touch upon, I know we spoke about it's just not about the physical side of it when you play. I think a lot of emphasis has now been laid on the mental side of things, where you see all of these Olympians and just athletes and all the players in like team sport in general coming out and speaking about mental health and how it's having a major effect. I know we saw Simone Biles pull out of the event. We saw Osaka pull out of the French Open, which came with its own set of complications. But the essential reason was she said she was not in a 100% of a 100% mental health stage. I don't know how to put it weirdly, but she was not 100% mentally fit is what came across in her statement when she pulled out of French Open. And Xenia, I know Vinesh Fogart wrote an article and how she was suffering from bouts of depression in the build-up to the games. Do you think it's like a generational thing that more athletes are now speaking up? Because let's think about it, like 7 to 10 years ago, nobody was speaking about this in the world of sport.
Yes, it's definitely a generational thing because the younger athletes are okay with saying that, I'm not doing well. They're treating physical injury and mental illness similarly, which is such a novel concept for us, right? In any space you are in, it is so difficult to ask for time off. In any even in corporate sector perhaps, saying that, I don't feel good today. I don't have, I'm not mentally prepared to do this. Can I take a break? Try saying that at work. I don't know how many offices would be okay with it. So I understand why these athletes find it all the more difficult. But the other aspect is when you're an athlete and when you're not feeling well, you're jeopardizing your body. A Simone Biles not feeling comfortable doing a vault it can be extremely dangerous for her to do it at a time. With Osaka, what she had said is she's willing to play, but she's not willing to talk to the media because that put her under pressure. So it just sort of manifests in different ways. And the very fact that players like them talk will make it an easy conversation for most players. With Vinesh, it's a bigger problem because her response came after she was reprimanded by WFI. And there seemed to be a lack of empathy in general to a player who suffered such a heartbreaking loss at the Olympics. We don't know what the internal workings are, but from after hearing both sides of the story, it feels like a conversation could have worked. And it also shows that we really look at medal or loss. There is no in between. There is no, but she did her best too. Bajrang Punia in his post medal conference said this line that, and nobody suffers the loss more than the athlete. I'm roughly translating. They said the athlete suffers the most when they lose, and I think that's something we watchers and fans usually forget, that as shattered as we are, that athletes going through something worse.
For sure. And I mean, I don't know like you said, we don't know the internal workings or what happened, but I feel the least we can do is have the back of the athlete that, is carrying our aspirations onto the Olympic venue. So yeah, I mean, I my heart just cries out, especially for people who feel like, mental issues and other things. Yeah, I don't know. I just feel very strongly about these things.
Yeah, they worked so hard for the last 5 years, physically put in the effort, and imagine your mind telling them, your body is not cooperating. That's just rough.
Yeah, I mean, it also takes a lot of mental fortitude for the likes of Simone Biles to say, look, I'm not going to do this. It's going to be, she is the goat. She has a goat emoji on the back of her leotard. So for her to say, I'm not going to participate in this because I don't feel 100% fit mentally is quite, it takes a lot of gumption to do it. But, and also you are right, it was wise of her to do it as well, because who knows, it's so easy to break a neck or break a back, and that could be really, really threatening too. So yeah, she definitely made the right decision on that front.
So with that being said, I think we can move to a topic that I've been wanting to talk about. Not because it's a great thing and how I feel about it, but it's Messi going to Barca. Sorry, Messi leaving Barca and going to PSG. I can't accept him leaving Barcelona. But yeah, so yeah, how do you guys feel about this? Like, any thoughts on what's the future going to look like?
I will ask Xenia before you answer, Xenia. I will ask you a provocative question, and then you can answer what Aniket said. Do you think PSG is now the most hated club in the world, if it wasn't already?
It's difficult to say, because football fans think very territorially about their clubs and about this. But if you were to look at just individual players, they really have two of the best players in the world, with Mbappe and Messi forming the strike force. So yes, it's a lot of, when you pump in money, you automatically get some, what was our reaction to the Galacticos? Or you keep buying a team, as opposed to what? So Real Madrid did it, and Real Madrid seemed to have their fair share of fans. Maybe newer fans coming in now who don't know the background will look at this strike force of Messi, Neymar and Mbappe and go like, oh, this is a team I'd like to support. I mean, the number of City fans were made in the 2010s, which some of the older people can't seem to comprehend. So who knows, fandom just works very differently.
100% sure. We were actually just talking about the Galacticos yesterday in something. I think me and Aniket were talking about all of these super teams or something. I mean, I did not grow up as a Real Madrid fan or a Barcelona fan, but looking at the Galacticos kind of sucked for me because, they had all of these big stars. But you are right. That might have forged a lot of fans, because going back to my football fandom, Manchester United was the only big team that they showed on Star Sports and ESPN when I was growing up in the late 90s, and that was how I caught on, and they were the team to beat. So yeah, you are right, Xenia. Maybe it gets all of these younger people towards following football more. I know Aniket has followed the club very well. I know there was a point when Messi said, I'm going to leave last year. And then things improved, it looked like. And then Messi said, I think I'm going to stay. Or, all signs indicate that he was going to stay. He even, in fact, said that in his goodbye press conference, right? What changed, Aniket? Why did he have to leave?
So it's a complex problem. So there are multiple facets to this one thing. So I think the larger thing at play was Barcelona at this point is like a very poorly run club. So we've run ourselves down into major financial problems. I think there is a $1.2 billion debt that we have. And in spite of Lionel Messi saying he'll take a 50% pay cut, we couldn't afford to keep him in the team. And I'm pretty sure it's not going to end with Messi's departure because, Bartomeu, who was the previous president, has really put us in a spot where now we have players like, you have Memphis Depay and stuff, players like that, like Kun Aguero, but we have not been able to register them for the coming La Liga games. And that's predominantly because we don't meet the La Liga's, cut on how much the wages to income ratio should be. So we have given players inflated salaries, and now I think we are paying for it. And the problem was the salaries are so inflated that you can't get rid of, kids and actually account for the wages, because it was Lionel Messi, Gerard Piqué, Sergio Busquets, these senior folks who were at their prime when they signed these big hefty contracts. And not to forget Antoine Griezmann, who's actually, I think he's being paid 4 times of what Harry Kane's being paid. So it's unfortunate situation for Barcelona to be in, and it's heart-wrenching to see Lionel Messi leave in spite of him wanting to stay. So yeah.
So I'll put it very simply. PSG started this when they paid 222 million for Neymar, and suddenly Barca were a strikerless, but with a lot of money. So they just decided to throw the money at the first striker, and they ended up doing it for 3 different strikers. Simple math, 222 and 3 strikers worth 100 million, it doesn't add up. And that is why we are here at a place where Messi is also with Neymar now.
For sure. 100% agree with that. And to be honest, it was Barcelona was a very poorly run club. We had Arthur Melo, who was a brilliant upcoming midfielder, 23 years old, and we traded him for Pjanic, who was a 30-year-old midfielder. And apparently there was no money exchanged because the price was the same. It was only on a spreadsheet evaluation where each player was valued for 62 or 70 odd million dollars. It hurts to see the club you support to be in this situation, but here we are. So, yeah.
Yeah, I was listening to Sid Lowe, who I really respect. He's a Spanish La Liga journalist. He was talking about how the salaries were adding up to 110% of what Barcelona actually makes every year. So they were actually spending much more than what they could afford. And then even with Messi gone, I think he was talking about how the salaries are now at 95% of what they make, which is still not meeting the regulations of the La Liga. So yeah, overall it's just a series of bad financial decisions by all accounts, it looks like. But I know, Zina, you have to leave soon, but we'd like to thank you first. Well, just a quick thing on PSG and Barcelona, to be specific. What is your enduring memory of Messi at Barcelona?
It would be that goal with Ronaldinho's assist. I mean, Aniket might be able to give me the exact dates, but that little dance.
Is that the chip you're talking about? Is that his very first goal for Barcelona?
Yes. I think it was, where he and Ronaldinho teamed up. And the more I see the video, the more I realize that was Barcelona at its best. You didn't create goals, you sort of painted those goals. And the day Barcelona lost that is the day the decline began. And it began with without Xavi and Iniesta, you had nobody to paint those goals for you. And how long is Messi going to, you can't, it's a team sport. Messi can't be painting alone.
And I think that was a 16, 17-year-old Messi. So, yeah.
It was very early 2000s.
I remember Messi celebrating on Ronaldinho's back when he scored that goal. I think that was the goal that you're also talking about.
Yes, that's the one. I can't remember the year. Probably the first goal.
Yeah, kind of crazy to think what Barcelona has now become. We'll see, all these big clubs have a reputation of, just by the sheer reputation, bouncing back, and who knows, they'll find somebody else in La Masia, Aniket.
We have to, there's no option. So I think we've also covered everything that we wanted to. Gautam, do you want to add anything in particular before Xenia actually leaves?
Xenia, as we conclude every episode, we ask for, or we suggest some recommendations that would enrich the lives of our listeners. So if you have any sports-based recommendations, that would be great. Well, first, let me just say, please go and follow Xenia on Scroll and The Field. Follow her on Twitter. She's a great Twitter thread, actually. And obviously, if you've listened to her now, you know how knowledgeable she is in sports. Not just, one sport, across all sports. So go ahead, Xenia. What are your recommendations?
One recommendation is what you already mentioned, the Sharda Ugra piece in the Indian women's hockey team. Speaking of Messi, Sid Lowe's piece in The Guardian, a tribute to Messi at La Liga, is amazing, and I would definitely recommend reading that because it tells you what all Messi stood for and why his departure, it feels like the end of an era. And if I can just add, because I do work for the Scroll, we've done a piece on the results of everybody in the Indian contingent, 120 plus contingent, and where each of them ended up. And that would be a ready reckoner, a quick look at everything that happened with India at the Olympics. So I'd recommend that on a personal note.
We'll definitely link those to the show notes here for sure. And also, I must say, you stole both of my recommendations, Xenia. Literally, my two recommendations were Sid Lowe's piece on The Guardian. It's called The Little Devil Who Became a Deity. Messi leaves a void like no other. And then the other one, just to reiterate what Xenia said, Betiyan to Badasses, How the Hockey Team Became the Team We Love and the Women They Wanted to Be, by Sharda Ogro on ESPN. So those are my two recommendations too. Little repetitive, but those are really, really good pieces. Definitely check it out.
Yeah, so keeping the topic we spoke about, golf and Aditi Ashok in mind, I wanted to recommend actually a movie. It's called The Short Game. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but it's about the World Championships in golf for 7-year-old kids. So it's actually a fascinating and an awesome watch. So that's one. The other recommendation I have is it's by the official Olympic channel. It's called The Academy. It takes folks into Pulela Gopichand's academy and talks. It's, I think, 7 to 8. It has 7 to 8 episodes, which is really cool to see how the badminton story in India actually started with Pulela Gopichand. So that's my second recommendation. And the third one, which I couldn't resist, was based on the transfers market we have now. It's called Wisdom of the Crowd. It's by New York Times, how transfer fees for athletes actually decided. And it's basically it's like a bidding market by spectators, and how these prices and valuations are actually taken seriously by clubs, where they actually put them on their payrolls and stuff like that. So these are 3 fascinating things that I wanted to share with the listeners.
Yeah, also read up Xenia's interview with Neeraj Chopra and also Aditi, which she did. So definitely check that out. We'll definitely link those to the show notes.
That'll be great. Thank you so much.
Xenia, I can't thank you enough for joining us. We just started this podcast, so it's great that we have it's great that we are getting some kind of validation with people like you joining our podcast, for sure.
Not at all. It was so much fun to be able to, just talk about sport with people who are as invested in it. And I hope the listeners also enjoy a conversation between just sports nuts.
For sure. And again, I'm saying, reiterating myself, thank you again for being here. And we look forward to seeing a lot of your work and hopefully having you again back sometime.
Thank you so much. That'll be appreciated.
Thank you so much. I think we should leave the listeners with Neeraj Chopra's winning moment. So I will leave it to producer Amin, who produced this podcast, to play that audio out as we leave. Thank you so much for joining, guys. Aniket, thank you.
Thank you, Gautam. Thank you, Aniket. And that'll be the perfect way to end this episode.
भारत की आन बान शान नीरज चोपड़ा, इनका नाम पहला गोल्ड मेडल भारत के नाम एथलेटिक्स में ओलंपिक गेम्स के अंदर, और वो आया है टोक्यो 2020 में। 87.58 मीटर्स का इनका वो लाजवाब थ्रो भारत को गोल्ड मेडल दिलाता हुआ।
All right, thanks again. Have a good day, guys.
Definitely, please do subscribe. Go to newslaundry.com, hit that subscribe button. I think the minimum you can pay is $300 per month. So that's really not much.
Yeah.
So please go ahead and please support independent media. We've just seen what happened with Pegasus and everything that comes with it, and just, sheds more light on how important it is for media to be independent. So please pay to keep news free.
All the News Laundry podcasts are available on Stitcher, iTunes, and any other podcast platform.
Please subscribe to News Laundry. Help us keep news independent. To catch all our podcasts on news, pop culture, current affairs, and sport, visit newslaundry.com. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel.